Once I realized that my life was worth so much more and that there was so much more in store for me, but I had to live and I had to choose me. When I made that pivotal decision in my life when I was in high school, that's when my journey began. And it truly was a journey, getting to the place where I would embrace wholeheartedly all of Tommi Vincent and being fully submersed in this idea that my life mattered and I'm more than enough. And any and everything that I desire to accomplish and achieve in life is at my disposal. But I have to make sure that I make myself the number one priority.
Hey guys, welcome to the Rebirth Podcast. I want to thank you guys for watching and for listening. In this podcast, we talk to individuals that have had to reinvent, recreate, and reimagine in order to grow. But before you watch and listen, we want to remind you to subscribe, to like, to review, and to share this episode and this podcast with everyone that you know. Thank you so much and enjoy. All right, so Tommi, I have first thing I have to kind of bring up is the other day I posted on Instagram in my stories. you know where I'm going with this. And I didn't respond. I was like, I'm going to save it for our conversation. And that's we got to get that out of the way first before we get this healthy conversation on the way. But I posted this photo of me running errands, wearing a mask, and it happened to be a Saints mask and playing the Saints, kind of anthem that they got. And you just responded with boo. And it wasn't Halloween boo. It was like, boo the Saints. Come on, Tommi. So like who's your squad? Who's your squad? Come on, tell me.
So listen, first of all, I knew when I did that, I said, it is obvious that he is a diehard. So I knew when I did that, this is really going to rub him the wrong way.
And you still hit send.
Because I'm like, this would be perfect. I know this is going to be our bonding moment.
Absolutely.
JR and I are going to be officially brothers and sisters as a result of this.
For real.
From a football perspective, actually, at this juncture in my life, I am a college football fan. When Troy played for the teams he played for in the NFL, obviously when he played for those teams, I was fans of those teams. And then we continued to have friends play in the NFL. And now we actually have some of our sons' teammates playing on teams in the NFL. So we follow people, but I don't necessarily follow a specific team. But I am a Ohio State fan, just in case you wanted to know. From a college football perspective, yes.
Like, how are you an Ohio State fan?
My son plays there.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
That's cool. Oh, that is cool. Yeah. So, I don't knock Ohio State. I have nothing negative to say about Ohio State. If anything, I have something positive to say. As an LSU fan, I'm just grateful that you guys gave us Joe Burrow, a couple of years ago. And that turned out pretty well for us. And people are like, that LSU's not good right now. I was like, I'm okay. We're national champions. You bought me 2 years at least, where I'm fine. I don't need to win every single year. I don't need to be an Alabama fan. I take what I get. And I'm grateful for it. And I rock with that. And Ohio State's kind of the same thing. You guys are a powerhouse. You guys are always in the conversation.
Yeah, they are. They just got to, cross the finish line. You got to from a player's perspective, and I don't play by no stretch, but I understand the hard work that goes into preparing and getting ready for those football seasons. And so you're playing for the big game. Ultimately, that's where you desire to go. Yeah, it's great to be the Big Ten champions every year because, that's what we do.
Right. I like how you suddenly just get that in there.
But ultimately,
what happens
you want to be
year.
the champion. Yeah, you want to be the champion. So, that I just hope that before my son Teron leaves the school that they have the opportunity to do that so he can, put that notch in his belt.
Yeah. How tough is it? And I obviously don't want the conversation to be all about football, but I want to pivot it a little bit about, parenting, right? And being a, obviously Troy, as you mentioned, played in the NFL for a long time, was in the Hall of Fame, like, just it was an incredible career. And then you obviously supporting him, and I'm sure, it was challenging for you as well, being a spouse and adapting to all of these different environments and schedules and everything else. And I'm sure raising your 5 children, and there was a lot that went into it. So it definitely is a partnership. But how have you as parents, having Troy as sort of the bar where he went to the NFL and has this incredible career, how have you guys been able to kind of manage that to where you don't dump that on the expectation onto your children to have that same bar that they have to reach? Or, I mean, how do you balance that?
So internally as parents, we do not have a cookie cutter approach to raising any of our children. So there is no set expectation, for our boys that they need to play football. We actually have one son who is not interested in football at all. And we celebrate that. We celebrate him being himself. Unfortunately, the expectation comes from people outside of our home. So anytime our sons played on teams, there was an instant expectation that they were going to ball out. And if
Yeah.
they fell short of that, there was things that people would say, their coaches would say, insinuating they're not meeting the expectation. And it was a conversation we had to have continually throughout the course of our sons' football careers, as, Pop Warner, high school, college, just making sure they understand that they have their own trails to blaze. And the expectation that other people put on them has nothing to do with them recognizing and understanding who they are as individuals first, because they're not football players. That's something they do. So let's get that straight. They are young men with a God-given purpose. And if football is a part of that journey, then we welcome it wholeheartedly and we embrace that platform. But we're not going to allow for the expectations that other people place on us to define and dictate who and what we will become.
Oh God, that's love. That's a soundbite right there. That is a soundbite right there. That's why I asked you to come on, Tommy, because I've had the opportunity to be around you and have share the stage with you virtually and actually in person, and just so mesmerized by just sort of your outlook and the way you approach everything from just being an entrepreneur, being a chef, which is something I recently learned that you were. I had no idea, and all of a sudden I started hitting up your Instagram, and I'm like, everything that as you post, I want to eat. You like, I want to eat everything that you post. But I how do you as a mother, knowing the challenges of the game of football, right? Like it's a dangerous sport at times. I mean, I played football growing up. My wife and I have had the discussion. I mean, she was a football fan, something she kind of did with her dad, but not really. And then when we got married, we started dating. She like, I got her into it. I explained cheering for this other squad that is playing against a division rival, right? So you always had, it's almost like fantasy football, like always had this investment. And she said to me, on a couple of occasions, she said, if we have a son, because we have a daughter now, but if we have a son and he wants to play football, nah, I'm not, nah. Like, how do you manage that? Because I'm sure in some ways the reality and the scare of the game.
Absolutely. So it goes back to the point of raising our kids to do and become what they desire to be. So when our boys desired to play football, it was something they desired to do. And so we encourage that, no different if they wanted to play soccer or basketball or they wanted to play an instrument, whatever it was, whatever it is, we're committed to investing in their dreams. And this was something that our sons desired. And I can't even fault them because they have a wonderful father. And young men that have great examples of older men, they desire to emulate them and strive to be what they have become. And so looking at their father and seeing what he accomplished in life, it was a very natural progression for them to desire to play the sport of football. And we know enough to teach them about making sure that they are their own self advocates and making sure that they speak for their bodies and don't allow for other people to tell them to tough it out or get back in there. No, if there's an issue, we need to address it because ultimately the longevity of your quality of life is what matters and not just this moment right here.
I love that. So where I know that this approach, right? This approach to parenting that you apply towards your children, is something that you had to learn. And for people that don't know the connection that you and I have, we both have done work with the National Domestic Violence Hotline. You have very openly discussed, your relationship, and that was an abusive relationship when you were younger. And I know that you and Troy are constantly doing a lot of advocacy and speaking out, because I think it's equally important to have, as you stated before, a man speaking on behalf of what women endure, and other men in scenarios as well. So that's the connection that you and I have. Where I remember the first time we met was, I think, 2019. We were doing a little video for the hotline, and I came in and you were already there with some of the other survivors, and I remember just laughing and joking and just having a good time. And then you had a flight that you had to catch. And so we never really got a chance to have a conversation. But over the course of the last few months, we've been able to connect and, do virtual events together and talk about, your experience and my experience. So I know that, as someone who has, is now in the space of where, hey, listen, this is who you are. You don't allow other people to control you and to kind of dictate your outcome and what path you should take. I know that wasn't always the case with you. I know
Mhm.
that that was something that, you've had to do a lot of work as an individual and as a collective in your relationship to be able to get to that point. Talk to us about that, the challenges you faced when you were in high school and being in that abusive relationship.
So for me, there was a lot of learned behavior of what was acceptable in relationships and what constituted a healthy relationship. And there were relationships around me where there was verbal abuse, there was physical abuse. I remember the first time that I ever experienced a domestic violence situation. I was 3 years old. I'll never forget it. I was in my room playing with a new Christmas toy, and my door was closed, and one of my relatives came busting the door, and she was naked and she had blood on her mouth, and she hid behind my door. And I remember thinking in that moment, I didn't know exactly what was going on. No one ever had a conversation with me about what had occurred. I knew that the police had arrived and that her then boyfriend was taken away because he had abused her, but then he was back living with her within that same week. And so when you have those continued instances taking place right before you, it begins to shape your definition of healthy relationships and what love is and what is acceptable. And so for me, my relationship in high school that was abusive, while it felt wrong, there were aspects of it that felt right because that was what I knew to be a relationship.
The familiarity element to it.
Absolutely. It was what I knew and what I saw. And for me, it was getting to the place where I recognized that what was taking place was not okay and it was not right. And quite frankly, getting the courage to fight for myself. We had reached a place in the relationship, and knowing the stories of other survivors, when you reach the place in a relationship where you start fighting back, at some point in time, you almost feel like, okay, this isn't abuse anymore because now I'm defending myself. I'm fighting back, and he's not just hitting me. It's now we're literally fighting each other, and so you feel a sense of power. But and even having to undo that, thought process that this makes this relationship acceptable because now I'm fighting back. And once I realized that this whole thing was a disaster waiting to happen, exactly how it upended in the end, where the boy tried to throw me off of a bridge. Once I realized that my life was worth so much more and that there was so much more in store for me, but I had to live and I had to choose me. When I made that pivotal decision in my life when I was in high school, that's when my journey began. And it truly was a journey, getting to the place where I would embrace wholeheartedly all of Tommi Vincent and being fully submersed in this idea that my life mattered and I am more than enough. And any and everything that is I desire to accomplish and achieve in life is at my disposal. but I have to make sure that I make myself the number one priority.
Yeah, I heard you talk about your father not being aware of what was taking place and how one day you were at work and he came and he picked you up, and you said that when he came and picked you up, you knew something was a little off, and how he drove you to your boyfriend's house at that time, and he suspected something. Talk to us a little bit about what that experience was like, because I think, and you've discussed this very openly, and I say we because I think people know to some degree a little bit of my experience, which is similar to yours. At the age of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I experienced my mother, being abused physically, verbally. And, but there's an element of where you protect the individual, even though they're, instilling this pain, inflicting this pain on you, you're protecting them. And that's a lot of what you did. And you told the story about your father finally coming to this realization. What happened?
So, like you mentioned, my father picked me up from work and he drove, at the time I was working at Mercer Hospital, and he drove me down the street. We had to pass right by the boy's house to get home, and he pulled the car over. And I knew that my dad was like, it's about to go down. And a piece of the story that I did not share that day when we were on the webinar for the domestic violence hotline was that my father currently has bullets in his leg from a domestic violence situation. The story that we were told, my grandfather was killed and he has the bullets in his legs in an effort to intervene in a situation with another one of our relatives.
Oh, wow.
And so in my mind, that is a part of what goes through my mind, that when you confront these types of situations, people die. It becomes violent. And so there was a piece of me protecting him, of course, because like I said, when we had the webinar, my love was not broken. I did care for him. And so wanting to protect him was my way of loving him. And then there also was a piece where, how does this play out? Is somebody going to get hurt? Is my dad going to get hurt? So all of that played a part in that moment in time. But I would say outweighing it was definitely me wanting to make sure that I wasn't going to have to break up with him, that our relationship wasn't going to be over, that he wasn't going to be angry with me, and also that it would not lead to him beating me up later on.
Wow. So you were stuck in the middle, having to balance, both of these approaches and these thought processes of, yeah, would I maybe want to tell my father and tell my family? Probably at some point. But then I also don't want my dad or another relative to get involved and it become violent. And now not only do I lose the relationship, but now I lose a family member, potentially to being killed or potentially having to go to jail for the like, yeah, that's a really interesting, dynamic that I think a lot of people don't often think of, right? And you had that experience, unfortunately, that caused you to get into this space of saying, no, I want to try to protect everybody, and I'll be the one that'll cope and deal with it as best as I can, which, as at that age, you don't really have the tools and the resources, to be able to navigate through something, like that. But what goes through your mind when you're that young? Because I'm sure there's young, young boys and girls listening to this podcast that may find themselves in a similar position. What goes through your mind of when you know that this individual is doing something and you know that it's not right? Like what goes through your mind to say, okay, I just got to deal with this, or do you want to cry out for help, or do you not? I mean, what goes through your mind?
Help never even crossed my mind. And you mentioned something when you say deal with. I grew up in a predominantly Black community, and I think about this often for people that grow up in communities like I grew up in. We have so much to contend with in life in general, just on a daily basis. And I feel like, and even in that moment, I can attest to this, that it's just one more thing that you have to deal with. as a Black woman, it's just one more thing that I have to deal with. Like, are we going to run the risk of calling the police and that situation turns deadly for the guy on the other end? There's other things happening in the community that take precedent over, and this is what's so wrong, this mentality over me. That's the piece that is missing, that connection with self-love and understanding your value and your worth. And if there was any young person listening, that's the key. There's so much education on, healthy relationships and dealing with how to have a healthy relationship. But at the crux of it all, the healthy relationship has to start with yourself. If you aren't able to love yourself in a real way, then how on earth would you be able to identify a counterfeit love relationship that's occurring in your life? You have to be able to fully embrace who you are, love yourself, have an appreciation for your value and your worth, because then when those situations occur, immediately a light bulb will go off and you're like, this is not it, because this doesn't feel good to me.
I saw a video you posted on Instagram, and I don't know what it was. It looked like avocado toast. I don't know, but there was some toast with something on it, and it was beautiful. It was on a plate, and you picked up another piece of toast that was a little burnt, and you held it up, and you talked about how this toast that is burnt, that has the dark spots on it. This is you. And then you picked up, a knife and you started scraping that off. And which, mind you, I probably would never thought of doing that. I probably be like, I'm either gonna eat it, or I'm gonna throw it away. Like, depending on what stage of life I'm in, I'm like, I'll make another piece of toast. I never would have thought of like scraping it off and be like, oh wow, like you get that off, and then all of a sudden you have the bread, the thing that as a whole, the color, the texture, just everything about the bread that you wanted in the first place before it was scarred, right? And
Mhm.
you end up taking all of it off, most of it off, and you said, now this is you. And I just thought, wow, what a beautiful way that you leveraged being a chef, your love of food, your love of, what food does and how it brings people together. And then to be able to teach a valuable lesson. But that's the key, right? Like, all of us are a piece of toast that has a little bit of like that burnt on it, right? Like, all of us have it.
Mhm.
And all of us have, well, I guess it's fair to say that, like, not all of us feel that we have the tools necessary to be able to scrape that dark spot off of the toast, right? But the resources are there, the tools are there. We just have to be willing to take that step to ask for help and to develop an element of trust. So let's backtrack a little bit to your dad picking you up. Your dad is driving you, and then it just happened to be on the way to stop at the boy's house, and he stops at the boy's house. What goes down?
Oh, I perform. I start screaming and crying, and it's not true.
Mm.
And
So how did he become aware?
so I can only assume that my mom, somebody told. I never got the piece of that story, but there was enough evidence that something was off. There was enough, and I believe that there is an inkling of an idea when people are in an abusive relationship. You may not be able to pinpoint it's abuse, but you recognize something's not right there. And so in that moment, I just knew I needed to do whatever it took to to get my dad not to go into that home, because it was going to end the relationship. And I did not want that to happen. And so I convinced him to keep, let's keep going home, and it's nothing. And I remember this look on my dad's face where I know he didn't believe me, but because of the hurt that I displayed in that moment, he just I can't describe it. I really can't. But there was a look in his face that just, when he pulled off, I don't know, I can't explain it, but I just knew that he knew that it was true.
So for him, you feel like for him as a father, which I mean, you're as a father, I mean, you have this desire to protect your children, but I would say that there's something right there's that bond that people talk about all the time with a father and a daughter, as there is a mother to a son. And I wonder if his energy pivoted to, I just need to be here for my daughter right now. I can't focus on this boy and what is not true. I need to focus on being here for her because clearly she's in distress and she's upset. And I just need to sit here and protect her right now from this conversation, right? Like, I
Yeah,
mean, that's
literally.
probably it. Almost like protect her from herself for a moment, right? Because she's putting on this performance. And I understand. And I'm sure if my daughter, found herself in a situation, I mean, your kids. And I knew, and if I see my daughter acting a certain way, and I'm like, okay, I know she does it now at 8 years old. I'm like, okay, you're performing. Like, what's this? Like, and I always say to her, I was like, you should go into acting. Like, man, that's good. That was really good. And of course, she's upset. She doesn't want to smile. She doesn't want to laugh. And she tries to end up laughing. I was like, because you'd get booked. Like you would get jobs nonstop. And I was like, and that's all you need. You just need a couple good jobs, and then all of a sudden the casting directors are always going to call you, and then you're set for life, right? Like there's and I'm one of those that when I commit to telling the joke or a story, like I commit to it, like I start building all these little elements on top of it, and I don't end. And so my daughter just starts laughing, and then sometimes she's like, okay, stop, like that's
Yeah,
enough, daddy. Like
enough, Dad.
yeah, yeah, like okay, I got it. Like okay, all right, all right. So I can only imagine that your father probably just kind of approached it from that element of just thinking like, I just need to be here for my daughter right now. So, you move on and then you get to this position of where you said earlier, which I can't even sit here and fathom this, the idea that, he got to a point where he almost, tried to throw you off of a bridge. Like what transpired right before that moment? And then what took place after that from Tommy's point of view? Forget him. I'm talking about you. Like what happened after that?
So we were in an altercation. We were coming from a talent show, and we had a couple of friends with us. So it was two couples, and we were walking home, and we had this altercation. And at some point during the altercation, I could hear the other guy we were with. He said, "That's why we hate going with y'all, because y'all always fighting." And then the fight continues to ensue. And then next thing I know, I'm picked up, and beneath the bridge, it was all concrete and broken glass. And I said to my friend, call my mom. And that was such a major breakthrough for me in that moment, because I no longer was willing to protect him. My life was on the line and it was worth saving. And I literally negotiated my way down. I remember saying, God, if you get me out of this, I just kept saying, if you get me out of this, and this is all like in seconds.
Mm.
And so I negotiate my way out, and he puts me down, and then I further negotiate for him to go home and for me to get home. We don't want to say something that's going to, we'll regret and blah, blah, blah. Whatever I had to say to get away from him. And that's what I did. And that was the turning point in my life, literally the turning point in my life.
So, you mentioned something in that webinar that we did together that as someone who knows somebody that is in an abusive relationship, what you should do. And that is so important to touch on because, like if I know a friend of mine that is in an abusive relationship, my natural instinct is to say, well, just leave, right? Just
Mm-hmm.
go and come on, like, or call the hotline. The hotline's available, or here's this other resource, right? Like, here, I'm giving you tools. And then that person comes back 2 weeks later, 2 months later, maybe 2 years later, and they're talking about the situation again. And I'm like, oh my God, like this is too much now. Like, I'm just gonna, yeah, I can't do this anymore, right? And then we become frustrated because we love the people that we want that are sharing this information with us. We want to be there for them and help them. Yet that's not the right approach. And you talked about you just unconditionally always being there for them, always being there for people. And for me, the reason I bring that up is because when you say that you told your friend, call my mom, to me, that's a credit to your parents. Your
Mhm.
dad who knew what was going on, but he's like, okay, yeah, like we talked about this, he's just going to support you and be there for you. Your mom more than likely knew as well, because moms know
Mhm.
everything. And but yet they just kept loving you and just kept being there for you, and just kept kind of maybe treating you the same way. And in the moment when you were ready, when you were right, because you needed to reach that point, you knew that they were there for you. And that's an important thing for somebody who is in that situation, right? To be able to know that they have a support system of a person or people that they know when that moment arrives, whatever that breaking point is for them, that they can reach out to you or to whomever else it may be, and know that you'll be there for them without judgment.
Mhm. When survivors or victims feel judged, then they further isolate, and you actually just support the abuser. You're actually contributing to the isolation that he already desires to have the victim in. And so it's so critical that if you suspect one of your friends or loved ones is in an abusive relationship, that they understand that you recognize that, if everything's not okay, that you're available for them, and that you leave space for them to be available for conversation and to share with you whenever it is that they desire to share. And it's easy to say what you would do and how you would react and how you would respond, or you never would do X, Y, and Z if you haven't experienced that situation. I've heard so many times just people say stuff was, she's so stupid. Why doesn't she just leave? Why doesn't she just call the police? Like all of these things of easy to say when it's not you. And I would just urge people who recognize that there's a situation with a friend or a loved one, that you reserve your judgment and that you literally just fully embrace that person and love them unconditionally, and don't support the agenda of abuse. Don't support the assailant in his effort to destroy and dehumanize the victim. When you do that, when you push people away, people can feel judgment, whether it's domestic violence or anything else. You can feel when you're being judged, and you hear these little microaggressions and words that people say that indicate to you that your situation is being frowned upon, and how you're handling your situation is not the proper way to do it. And so it's really important just be supportive and just love unconditionally.
I think that's one of the things that I had to learn. And honestly, I'm still learning. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'm at the finish line. I think I'm still learning, where I've had people in my life, friends, family members, that are having a challenge or dealing with a challenge, right? And they come to me. One thing I had to learn was that when people come and share, they're not always asking for, for that feedback or for that direction or that guidance or the how to deal with. They're just venting. They're just sharing. And your job in that moment is specifically to listen. That's it.
Mhm.
And so, one, that was the thing I had to learn, is that, oh, when you're venting to me, I don't always have to give you the solution. I don't know. Not always here to fix it. I'm here to listen to you and to create a safe space with no judgment for you to feel like you can elaborate. I had to apply that with my wife. I had to apply that, with that was probably one of the first places I had to learn to apply it. Is my wife comes and she's like, there's a problem in it, and I'm like, okay, well, here's the solution. And I just cut her off, and I'm like, all right, cool, we talked about it. It's done. It's a wrap. It's done, right? Yeah. They're like, I just scraped off the burnt on the toast. We're good. Go eat it. Like it's you. You're fine now. And she's like, that's not what I wanted. I'm like, well, what do you want? Why do you want to still talk about the problem? Right. And that was a learning curve for me. But I had to also identify that a lot of that stems from not being able, as a young boy, being able to save my mother. Being able, when I would cry to my mother and say, Mom, like, get out of this relationship. Mom, this isn't healthy. Mom, why do you keep going back? Mom. And she would still go back. And still today, like, there's a part, like, I realize and I identify that that is the reason why I'm so passionate about trying to help somebody else, is simply because I know that or I feel like I wasn't able to save somebody that is so
Mm-hmm.
close and special to me. So I try to save everybody else. I try to show up. And that's not healthy. That's not the way that it's supposed to be done. And so there's, in many ways, we all have to be able to identify in ourselves, why are we responding and reacting in a certain way? What is it about this experience that is being shared with us from a loved one that is triggering us to respond in the way that we are?
Yeah, because that actually serves you. It's not even about serving the other person because of, your experience. And when I say you, just in general, because of that experience, you're more interested in making sure that you are able to fix it. That's about you. That's not about the other person. So, asking people, how can I help you? Is there anything that I could do to assist you? Getting permission to help is just as important as listening, because everyone is not, to your point, like with your wife, that it's not about the helping. And there have been times when there have been situations occurring in my life, and I have withheld the process from Troy until I reached the finish line, because I knew he would try to jump in and fix it and make it all better. And there's some journeys in life that are necessary for our development and for for our, cultivating and building our own muscle. And if everything is always fixed and taken care of, then how does that serve the person who has the ability to become greater and stronger, gain wisdom, and just get some grit for themselves by going through a challenging situation?
But where's the balance? And this is what I struggle with. And I feel like now I feel like I need you to cook up one of those meals and we sit down and we just talk right now. Like, that's what I feel like. I feel like this conversation would be so much better over, where is that balance? Because my mindset is like, I get everything you're saying, right? Like, I get it. But at the expense of waiting and risking something terrible happening to somebody, and then I have to live with that. Like, where's that balance? Where's that fine line? Like, I mean, what help me understand, because I understand what you talk about when you talk about like people need to develop their own grit and their own muscle and their own, they got to go through that journey. They got to go through that experience. I get that. But thank God you're here, right? Thank God there are other survivors that are still here, but there are so many that aren't. So where is that balance? And I know I'm putting you in this weird predicament of like being this professional and expert in many ways, but I'm just curious of what your thought process is related to that.
So if we're speaking specific to domestic violence, every scenario is very different. There is no simple approach to this because this is an extremely complex issue. And there are so many dynamics in an abusive relationship from the victim's perspective. And when someone intervenes, how that plays out. And also considering the fact that when someone is in an abusive relationship, and if someone is coming in to rescue, that there's also the potential of their harm. And so it's not something that's not a situation where you could just jump in and be the savior of the day, because there is going to be a fallout either way. It's either going to create a situation for the victim, or it could potentially create a situation for you and the relationship that you have with the victim. Because if it causes a schism between you all and it causes the relationship to sever, then the abuser won. So it's really critical to just be sensitive to the nature of the situation and take your lead from the victim. Give the victim the power and the authority to make the decision for their life, because that's what they're lacking. That's what, in that relationship, the abuse structure, they feel powerless. And so by you just coming in and doing whatever you want to do in that situation, you're stripping them of their power again. That's abuse in itself. But to your wife, let's get back to your wife. And when we're talking about those situations, now that's a different story, because it's still important to take her lead. Now, I will say there are times where Troy and I may have, there may be a situation that he's experiencing or I'm experiencing, and we've worked really, really hard to give each other space to grow in our situations so that we can really get some bought sense from them. There are times where we have to say, okay, now let's talk about this. And then we give our perspective and we give, what we forecast could potentially come out of this situation. And because we value each other's thoughts and perspective, and we don't just give them all the time, we know that if one of us is speaking up in regards to a situation that we're in, that we should listen, because what we're saying is something that we feel compelled and we can no longer restrain, because now this is creating a situation that we need to be mindful of what the ramifications of it could potentially be.
So, my wife and I, we were walking the other day, and she's on her journey right now. My father-in-law unexpectedly passed away over the summer. And, this is 8.5 years after my wife's younger sister unexpectedly passed away. So there's been a lot of loss and the family within a short amount of time and sudden. And, my wife right now is on this journey of, just being able to understand, maybe patterns of her own behavior and why she responds and reacts to things. And we were talking about, it came up about like apologizing. And we were talking about somebody else. And I said to her, I was like, well, we were talking about my relationship with my mother. That's how it came up. And I said to her, I was like, my mom always had this belief that as a parent, you don't apologize to your children.
Mm-hmm.
And I always, as a kid, I'm just like, what does that mean? Like, that doesn't make any sense. That's wrong, or you were wrong, or like, what's wrong with apologizing? She, and her belief is that if you apologize, you essentially give up the power and control. So for her, it was always like, I'm just going to sit here and just keep rolling with this, never apologize, and still have power and control. Yet all she was doing, unfortunately, was kind of in some way pushing me away, because I started to have a little bit of resentment about that approach. And I said to my wife, I was like, that's why sometimes it's hard for me to apologize. That's why it's hard for me to, not that I don't acknowledge when I'm wrong, but I apologize in a very different way. And my wife says, that's so true. Like, I've come to expect with you, when you've done something that it bothered me, whatever, you'll kind of have this roundabout way of apologizing, that sometimes it's not a clear cut, I apologize, I'm sorry. You're going to come and joke with me. You're going to come and talk to me. It's going to be like this roundabout way. And it's so interesting, right? To be able to like understand the origin of where these patterns, where they stem from. And it's a simple thing at times that unfortunately over time just continues to manifest into a big problem. And when she shared that with me, I got to be honest, and I didn't tell her this because of the conversation. So, this will be the first time she hears it on the podcast. It didn't make me feel good. It didn't make me feel good, because I want to feel like I can go to her and be able to say, listen, I'm sorry. Just say it. I'm sorry. And I know that I have it in me. I know I have the potential to say I'm sorry. I'm very adamant about going to my daughter and telling her, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for raising my voice. I'm sorry for being upset. I'm sorry. And my daughter very early on would say, it's okay, Daddy. And I remember one time correcting her and saying, no, it's not okay. Do not get into the pattern of believing that that is acceptable behavior,
Mm.
right? Like, that is not okay. I don't want you to fall into this belief that that's the norm. That's okay. And so it is interesting, right? Like, what is it about us that allows us to be the ones that are triggered, and allows us to now not make it about the person but make it about ourselves, when it's never about the person listening. It's about the person sharing and venting. Let's move a little bit where you eventually get out of this relationship. You then go to college, and then now you meet the husband you have now, that you have a beautiful life with, and 5 children. And you have grandchildren. Do you have
I
grandchildren?
do. I have four.
4 grandchildren. I mean, you've created this beautiful life for yourself, and you met Troy. What are some of the things that you felt that maybe because of the previous experience that you had Because you met him at 19, is that right?
I was 18 when we got
18.
together and we got married. I was 19.
You were 19 when you got married. And so, man, I was just starting life. But no, I think about more like how you had just gotten out of a relationship and you jumped into this relationship. Some people would say that's a recipe for disaster. That
Mhm.
is not a healthy thing to do. But you guys have managed to do it incredibly well. And part of that, and I'd love for you to speak on Troy from Troy's perspective. Troy equally as a man experienced a lot of trauma, experienced the same thing that you experienced when you were 3 years old, right? Like he also experienced that. So you guys were coming into the relationship with your own perspectives, but how did you guys manage to ultimately create this space where you can be open with one another and then heal as an individual and as a couple, and then be able to now share this information and create this example for your family and your children?
So when we got together, like most relationships, you're not presenting the worst aspects of yourself or what in your mind, you're thinking these are the worst aspects. You show up as your best and, you're doing everything to win each other over and
Mhm.
to seal the deal. And so we did not have conversations about the abuse that either of us experienced. And so that really created some situations in our relationship because I was this over zealous communicator and Troy shut down when confrontation came about. So we had this one scenario, where I'm, rah, 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 and throwing remote controls and, like, no, we gonna handle this. We gonna handle this. And he's like
Uh,
walking away
right.
and me
Because
not.
you were bringing the previous relationship, you were bringing that same energy because that's the way you express love to each other in the previous relationship. And you just thought, well, this is what I got to do in this one. And Troy's like, I want nothing to do with that, right? Like it's yeah, wow, that's interesting.
Absolutely, because I thought that's how I learned communication. For Troy, his walking away was because he would not allow for himself to be in a situation where he would go there. That was his mechanism of protection because he knew he was not going to be look like anything that resembled what he witnessed growing up. And so that was a cycle in our relationship for a good period of time. And we really had to learn how to communicate with these, I don't want to call them secrets. We just had not divulged that piece of ourselves yet. And so, not having that backstory on one another, it just appeared that we just flat out didn't know how to communicate. But it's no different than when you're talking about, in your relationship, the piece of you just not coming to the terms of how important it is to apologize and actually use those words with your wife, because that's what you experienced when you were growing up. We all bring something forward from, what we experienced and what we witnessed as kids. And then it's up to us to do the work. If we truly desire to be our best selves, if we truly desire to have the most amazing relationships possible with our partners and our spouses, then we have to be willing to identify those pieces that we brought forward that no longer serve us.
Hmm. So how did you guys eventually get there? Because from the times that I've been around you and I've heard you talk about him, I've never spoken to him personally, but I feel like I have a good indication of your relationship and your family dynamic, and you guys have the company Vincent Country, and you guys talk about family and faith and food and and all of these different ways of being able to influence and impact other people in a positive way. And you guys are so positive, and like I said, he's such a he's a big voice as well for this community, right? As of course you are, being on the board of the domestic violence hotline. But how did you guys eventually get to this place of where you have this beautiful, healthy relationship, and now you can share these tips with other people that are still bringing elements from previous relationships into current relationships?
We had to take the mask off with each other. It's one thing when you go through life and you go into your job or you go into outside spaces, and you put on so that you can fit whatever space that you're in. And when you're living in a home and you're living with someone and you still have on that mask, then ultimately you really don't know each other. And so for us, it was critical that we took these masks off and that we had the hard conversations. We're not opposed to fighting fair. We're not opposed to having conversations that may not feel good in the moment, but when we come out of them, we understand and recognize that we're more fortified than ever because we've taken the elements that we consider to be dark spots in our life and we expose them to the light. And so as a result of that, those dark areas no longer have power over us. And so literally we had to strip away the mask and remove the layers, and we had to become vulnerable with one another. And that is not easy to do in any form of relationship. But I personally believe that if you want to experience love on another level with your spouse, you've got to go there, because there's nothing like being able to walk in a space and live in your home without your personal torment. When you keep those secrets and you allow for stuff to remain in darkness, then you have these vain imagination conversations with yourself. You hear things and stuff that doesn't even exist, you'll conjure it up in your mind because you have this thing over here that nobody knows about, or in particular, your spouse doesn't know about. But when you bring it all on a table, it has no more power because you both know what the deal is and you both can work through and conquer anything together because you guys are fully transparent with one another.
The key is vulnerable, getting to a place of being vulnerable. How long did it take you and him to get to that point of where you can be transparent with one another and feel safe that when you shared your portion and he shared his portion, that either one of you weren't just going to be like, I'm out?
Yeah, so it is a process. It's in it, and we're still in that process. I don't even want to give any illusions that we have arrived. Not at all. It is a process that we are committed to. And so it's like if you're doing something and you do it for the first time, before you make that initial step, there's fear. And then once you take that step and you recognize, oh, it wasn't that bad, then you have that experience to understand you can keep making the steps to move forward. And so that has been the progression of our relationship. There was one time in our marriage where Troy and we had reached, it was a crossroad. And in this crossroad it was either we're going forward together or we're going our separate ways. And we fought our way back to each other. And I believe it was in that moment we knew, okay, we are together. We are committed to this thing. So whatever it takes. When we made that decision, whatever it takes, that meant that we had to be all in order for that to happen. So I went to counseling. I was 38, I believe, when I started going to counseling. So from 19 to 38, like that's the process, so I think it's important for people to understand that if you're committed to it, recognize that this is a lifelong journey. The question is, are you willing to go all the way?
Because like you said, once the both of you started to be vulnerable with one another, all of a sudden you started to experience this different kind of love that you knew you loved each other, but before that moment, the love wasn't on the same level. And now you guys have a different love that you have for each other. And how important is it though, as well, to be able to do that work individually, through therapy and through, just outside sources that kind of help you navigate pain, and in order to be able to set a good example for, your children, because children learn just, I mean, as we talked about it earlier, they learn just by watching. And, you don't even have to necessarily explain anything to them or have a conversation. No, like they watch you. I mean, I give my wife a hard time all the time. We're always picking on one another, but I always pick on her. I'm always joking, and that about me in the little bit of times that that we've been around each other. And my daughter, picked up on that. Well, now she'll like, we kind of tag team on my wife, and my wife's like mini me over here, like, and I'm always being attacked. And my daughter, sometimes she doesn't even realize what she's doing, but it's just learned behavior from me just giving my wife a hard time. She picks up on it as well. And so children, they observe and they learn, and then they ultimately implement what they've learned. And so how important was it for you as a woman, as a mother, as a wife, to be able to say, I got to work on me so I don't pass that on to my sons and then to my daughters as well?
It was the level of importance for me personally. There are no words to really to describe it. I knew that I did not want my children to continue the same patterns of behavior that I participated in and also that I experienced. And so I recognize that as a parent, children, they do what we do. They're not concerned with what we say. So, like, to your point, children know what they can be by what they see. And so a lot of the behavior that I had that I considered to be destructive behavior was everything that I witnessed growing up. And I often wondered about my life, what would my life be like had I not chosen this particular activity or, engaged in this type of behavior? Recognizing also today that all of that stuff makes me who I am today. But as a parent, just recognizing that if I can give my children visually the blueprint for living their life and really, dismantling all of what I just think it's just like the generational baggage and garbage that we bring forward. I want to drop those bags off outside of, my home. I want to discard them completely so they're not a part of what we have going on. And especially where my girls are concerned, I wanted them to walk away when they leave this home to recognize how valuable they are and how significant they are in life, and making sure that they are able to be unapologetically who they have been created to be. In order for me to do that, I had to do the work, and I have to be vulnerable with them. I am so transparent with my children. They know the details about, my experiences growing up, the choices I made growing up. And so if I'm telling you or sharing with you why this may not be a good idea, I'm not telling you just for the sake of speaking. I'm telling you because of experience. If you can learn from me, if you can grow from me, here it is. It's all on the table. Granted, kids make their own decisions. And sometimes as parents, we have to watch them go through things that we wish they would not. But I also recognize that if this is part of their journey in life, that they'll be better for it as well.
At what age do you start having those conversations with children?
So if you're asking me personally, it's from day one.
Really?
Like, no, seriously, we are so transparent with our kids and have been since they were little. And, especially where external relationships are concerned. There are relationships in our life where, I don't know about you, but I was raised that there's just certain relationships that you don't have an option of not being in a relationship with that person. You don't have an option of saying, no, I don't want you to hug me. I don't want you to kiss me on my cheek. This is your uncle, your aunt, your grandparent, your cousin. And so you don't have the liberty of rejecting that relationship. Well, for us, because of what we knew to be true and the experiences that we had encountered, no, we need to talk about relationships regardless in respect, or there is no respect of person here. We need to talk about these relationships so you recognize and understand it's okay for you to have your own boundaries. It's okay for you to move comfortably in your own skin and reject what does not feel good to you, or reject what you know not to be right for your life. And so we start that stuff as early as they can comprehend.
That's so good. And it's, boundaries is such an important element to all of this. And to be able to, say, to be able to know, like, this is my space, this is my body. And if you won't confine to that, then, you don't have access to my space, period. And it's such a difficult thing when you talk about the liberty of being able to have that choice with certain individuals, right? Like there's certain cultures and communities that unfortunately it is ingrained in us that because that person is blood, because that individual is a family friend or a neighborhood friend, whatever, that you are in the wrong if you were to tell them no, no, whatever it may be, no. And it's important to be able to instill that in children. And so I think that that's something that I admire so much about what you and Troy have done with your children, because it isn't. I think kids are smarter than what we like to believe, and kids know more than what we like to think that they know, and we just have to trust them and give them as much of the tools as they possibly can take, and hopefully they'll apply it in their own scenarios in life. So I love all of this. I mean, but as I mentioned earlier, what I love too is I love all the pictures you post of all the food on social media. So how did culinary come into play in your life? How did you find a love of food and being a chef and creating recipes? I mean, where did that start?
So literally, food is a manifestation of my healing, me becoming a chef. And so that's why, you talked about how I gave the lesson through the avocado toast. Food, when we all have these gifts that are within us, and through life and trauma and experience, oftentimes we're not cultivating these gifts. Prior to me going to counseling, I had reached this place where I was really struggling with just having the motivation to be present in life. So I was in the house, but mentally I was checked out. And when I was going through counseling and when I was, fighting my way back to me, one of the things that was so prominent in my mind was my experiences around the dinner table at my Nana Edie's home and all of the opportunities we had, despite, some of the craziness happening inside of our family. When we came together as a family and fellowshipped and broke bread around the table, everything was okay. And so for me, when I, examine my life, there were these moments in life where I recognized that, man, when food is inserted and we're around this dinner table, it has that same healing power. And so I went back to food. One, I wanted to finish my degree in something that I believe would be meaningful for me, because I left college when I got married at 19. So I got my degree in culinary arts. And then I started moving in the space of a private chef, because I also recognized that it was more important for me to still be present for my family and have the flexibility with my schedule to not have to forfeit that piece of me, because I've made my greatest investment in that part of my life. And
Mhm.
I wanted to continue to be there. But I also knew that I needed this piece for me, because it was a point of identity, the food and the ability to heal people through food, first starting with myself. And that's how I came into the space of becoming a private chef, and then utilizing that for, I use it to do fundraisers for the National Domestic Violence Hotline. I do a brunch in the Life Saving Conversation, where I bring, 10 people together, including myself, and we talk about domestic violence. We talk about the conversations that nobody wants to have, turning up the volume and removing the stigma from the conversation. And we use it for activations that we do during Super Bowl week. So that piece of me has really started to be magnified in a way that I could have never imagined. But I am not surprised, not one bit, because it's the piece where the light came on for me in that area of darkness. And it was the guiding light that pulled me out of that dark place.
It's beautiful. That's beautiful. I love that. So you started with Troy, right? You started Vincent Country, and talk to us about what Vincent Country is.
So Vincent Country is a family lifestyle brand, and our three pillars are faith, family, food. Troy and I, as we mentioned, we got married. I was 19, he was 23. We've been together for over 28 years now. And we believe throughout our journey that we've acquired some elements of life that we believe will really be great impartations into other families if they choose to use it. And in addition, there is this notion that the Black family is an anomaly, and that we're like, our family structure is all broken. And we really did not like the narrative around the Black family in media and in the culture of the United States. And so we decided to insert ourselves into the story. And if we can provide example, and if we can provide people with an opportunity to look at our lives and recognize that any and everyone can find success where they are, that your family, your household, so the Martinez household is its own country, it's Martinez country. And being able to cultivate the country that you have instead of looking at life on the outside, then you can put together a blueprint for success and build a legacy for your own family. So that's what Vincent Country is about, being able to give people visuals, to give people elements that will create home, and just give people an opportunity to recognize that there's so much strength in family. And if you apply yourself in the proper way, then you will be able to develop your own country.
How do people get this blueprint, right? Is it something that you have one-on-one conversations with individuals? I mean, I know you do the gathering where you talk about, the hotline and abuse, but through Vincent Country, do people sit down and have conversation with you? Obviously now it's a little bit more challenging to do it in person, but is it virtual? How do people get this blueprint? Is it through just material and content that you share with them on a monthly basis, or however often that is?
Yeah, so we have a blog on our website at vincentcountry.com. We also, how we talked about with kids, how kids can be what they're able to see, right? And so just think about how our culture is so saturated with the images on TV or images on social media. We have this influx of this is what life should look like. And it's most of the time, it's not attainable for anyone. And so you're chasing after something that is a concept that's not even real and something that you can achieve in life. And so for us, being out front and being authentic and being real people, living a real life, for us, if you're able to see that, then that gives you something to aspire to. It also inspires you to, really start approaching your life in a different way. And so for us right now, it's about having the visuals and being able to see it and glean from our life. And then we do couples retreats and we do women's retreats, and they're invitation only. So this is not something that's open to the public, but as we walk along through our journey in life, we've encountered people, some we know like in an intimate way, and others we meet along the way. And we're like, you come to this would be really good for you. So we have a bunch of different vehicles that we use to, give this option of lifestyle to people.
I love that. So Tommy, where can people find you? Obviously you mentioned vincentcountry.com, but what about you personally?
So on social media, on all platforms, I am at Chef Tommi, Tommiv.
Tommy V, Tommiv. So you guys go check it out. You can go check out that video I talked about with the avocado toast and scraping off, the burnt, part of it. But, Tommy, thank you so much for, your willingness to be vulnerable with me and the audience. And, thank you for your strength. Thank you for, most importantly, being a survivor and well, I guess equally important, being an example. You yourself, I'm talking about you yourself, and then of course you with your husband and your family, for being an example to so many other people that, hey, that the way your story begins doesn't have to be the way that it ends, and you are in control of that. And I know that a big part of your family, a big part of your company is faith as well. And I know that faith plays an integral part in, what you guys do, that I believe you guys know that this is your mission and this is how we are all being utilized, through the gift that God gives us to be able to impact and influence other people. And that's a beautiful thing, to be able to connect with that purpose, to be able to create that identity for yourself, and then to be able to put it into action. I think a lot of people may know maybe their purpose, but it may be hard for them to put it into action. They don't know where to begin. And I just think it's a beautiful thing that you guys are one of the examples to a lot of people to say, this is how we do it. And you too are a survivor. And what is something that you would want to share, kind of a parting thought that you would like to share with everyone?
I would like everybody to know that you are uniquely made and created, and no one in the entire earth could ever beat you at being you. So embrace that, be comfortable with that, and live out loud.
And go Saints, right?
Ah.
I had to bring it back to that. I had to bring it back to where it all started. Oh my God. It's my wife said to me, she's like, listen, you got me into this football game. And, she's like, and then my wife is one of those where she gets invested. She is invested. And I love her for it. And we talk about, she got really into being a Saints fan. And I remember that there was one particular, and I tell this story all the time, but there was one moment I was traveling and I just finished an event after speaking, and I got off at the stage and I called her and she's like, did you see the news? And in that tone, and I'm like, no, like what? Like, and I'm in my mind, I'm like, what happened? And I'm like, no, what happened? She's like, we traded for this guy from the Giants, and and I'm like, that, that's what you're talking about. That's the. And she's like, yeah, like they say he's good, and this and that, and I'm like, yeah, and then. She's always like calling me. Do you see what happened on what they said on First Take and on ESPN and NFL Live and all this other stuff? And she got to the point, Tommy, where like I'd have to like tune her out a little bit. Like I'd have to be like, you're a little too extreme. Like things happen in the game and she's like jumping and I'm like, calm down, it's the Saints. Like we find ways to put ourselves in a predicament where we almost throw the game away. So it's okay. But I got a lot of my friends that are like, man, that's a great problem to have, right? Like I wish my wife watched ESPN or watched all this other stuff. And I love her to death for it. But
You know what's significant about that, JR? And I just want to go back to relationships. When you have a good woman in your life as a male, recognizing that whatever you give her as your mission and as your charge in a relationship, she is going to go all in. That's why it's so important that, as the male in the relationship, that you honor and respect and cultivate your wife, because she's going to buy into whatever you give her. And that's where you have the dynamics of power. Mm-hmm. And when someone who doesn't have the right mindset in a relationship, they abuse that piece of her. Mm-hmm. Where if you really were to recognize that, man, between she and I together, we can do anything that we put our minds to, because we're in this thing together. And so that's just something to just be mindful of. She's into the Saints because she knows that's what you loved. And so she said, okay, if this is what JR is into, then I'm going there. And then, we take it to a whole nother level. You give us something, we going like, oh no, we going to make this thing. So that's what she did. She gave that thing life. That's what women do. We give life.
Yeah. You know what? She gave it a heartbeat. You're right. She did give it a heartbeat, because before that, I'd kind of do my thing, but it was just kind of like whatever. But it's become, like we have created, and I posted the other day because I'm an LSU fan because I was born in Louisiana. So, and we've gone to a couple of games and with our daughter, and my daughter came home from school the other day and she picked out her own outfit and she was wearing an LSU hoodie, and I happened to be wearing mine that day, and she came home and my wife took a picture of that and I posted it and I said, no, it's not necessarily about LSU, the university, the institution, right? It's about the bond and the memory that I have created, that we are creating together as our little trio, that yes, it's great, the Saints. Yes, it's a sport. I get it. But it's what we are creating and allowing them to feel like they can be a part of it as well with me, and me feeling like, well, guys go watch this and girls go do what they do, right? Like, no, I want you guys to be a part of it as well. And I love that when they're a part of it, and I love that they love being a part of it as well. So, based on that comment you made, I'm going to get off of this. I'm going to go give my wife a hug, tell her I love her, and tell her I appreciate for bringing life and bringing a heartbeat to, the Saints, my love of Saints and football. But, Tommi, thank you so much. I really feel like, again, as we've only met on a handful of times, like I really feel like, I feel connected to you, and I haven't met, Troy, but I feel like a connection to, your family, and I know that when the world opens back up, we'll break bread, and we'll have conversation about life and faith and food and family and all those beautiful things. And I just thank you for, just your energy and your willingness to come on and share with me and everybody listening right now. And again, you are a survivor. Your smile indicates that. And just thank you for being an example to all of us.
Thank you. And it was an honor and a privilege to join you today on Rebirth. So thank you so much for the invitation, and have me back anytime.
Yeah, we'll do it. We'll have to do it. We definitely will. All right. Thank you, Tommi.
Alrighty. Thanks.
Faith, family, and food. I mean, how do you not love all three of those things together? I want to thank Tommi for coming on the podcast and talking about her story. I know that it's difficult to relive that, but I also know she understands the power in sharing her story of survival. I want to thank every single one of you for listening and joining today's episode. I hope that you were able to pick up some strength and wisdom from Tommi's story. Please be sure to let us know some key takeaways and moments that may have resonated with you by tagging me and Tommi on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, wherever you post. We would love to know what you thought about today's episode. And as always, don't forget to hit subscribe for weekly episodes. I look forward to continuing our journey of change and awakening together. Till next time, this is Rebirth.